Welcome to Movie Mayhem. I know it's been a long time since I've made any videos, but I recently sat down and I watched Man of Steel, Dawn of Justice, and Justice League. Now, when I talk about these movies, I'm only talking about the full director's versions. In my opinion, any theatrical release of any movie is an abomination, and I do not count its existence. Even in the rare case, it might actually have been better. Don't care. Director is the person signing off on a film, and their vision, to me, is the final version. Whether that be better or worse. Now, 99% of the time, it is better. So that's the versions I'm discussing. The Joss Whedon abomination of film is not even, I'm not even going to, I'll give a footnote to that. But after watching these movies, I felt compelled to make a video. And that should say something, as anyone who follows the channel knows I've gotten to the point where I rarely make any videos. And a lot of it has to do with my disappointment in film and, how many reviews of old movies am I going to do? I don't do parody reviews. I don't make fun of films. I just review the films. If I'm reviewing a film from the 1970s or 80s that hardly anyone saw, there's not much interest in checking out the review either. And some of them are honestly hard to review. If they're not funny or exceptionally good, there's no point. So let's talk about the Snyderverse of films. And I'm going to start with, in my opinion, I feel, watch them all together. I think that series of 3 films, unfortunately it was never more, is the greatest superhero, project ever made. I was filled with a bit of sadness thinking too, that I'll never get to see anything like that ever again. And there never will be. And I'm going to go through and kind of explain my points with this. And part of it was, I'd seen some criticisms about people constantly talking about DC, dark, and the recent DC failures. And I think a lot of the recent DC failures, that's a problem of the execs. They're making bad movies. That's all there is to it. None of that is definitely Snyder's fault. Him and Nolan walked away many years ago. Even like, these are the last of Snyder's visions. No, he had some footnotes, but he hasn't had his finger on anything in how many years? So you can't blame him for The Flash. You can't blame him for Black Adam. Certainly not Shazam. Even Aquaman 2. The last touches that still had the Snyder Nolan footprint on them were Wonder Woman and Aquaman 1, the first Wonder Woman. And otherwise, they were out. So you're dealing with pure studio money-making stuff at that point. So let me start with casting. Casting, I felt, in the Snyder visualization of this universe was all really good. And those of you who don't know, I would say I'm more of a DC fan. I have read and owned every DC comic from January of 1966 until 13 months into New 52 when I quit reading comics because I'd kind of gotten fed up with all the rebooting and silliness. I did read a lot of Marvel too. However, I feel Marvel up until about, I want to say like 88, 89 was really good. They had some clunker titles in there. Power Pack. But DC had some goofy ones like that too. But then Marvel just jumped the bandwagon. Now they've had good stories since, but as a universe as a whole, it was kind of garbage. Especially in the 90s. Yeesh. But I have a lot of attachment to the Marvel characters. So I would still say I'm more of a DC universe fan. So I'll give that, let's understand that going in. When I saw Man of Steel the first time, that was obviously uncut in the theater. That was the first time I walked away and said, that's Superman. That was Superman. I've heard a lot of complaints. There's not enough Clark Kent. But Clark Kent's been done. And what is Clark Kent? That's not, to me, that was never a challenge. The story of Man of Steel is how Superman came to terms with being Clark Kent, how to find his humanity. And the movie is so full of the message of hope and being able to find positivity, no matter how challenging life is or how dark things get. it just struck such a chord with me that, wow, this is the Superman that I've been waiting to see on film. I don't dislike the Donner movies. No, Superman 3 and 4 are stupid, but that they are what they are. They're entertaining, but to me they weren't Superman, not from the comics. You could argue Reeves looks great, and his acting is fantastic, but the movie to me was never a Superman comic. It never felt like that. It felt, I don't know, silly. Because if we're going to do something from the 60s or the 70s Superman, well, I need some cool, colorful villains, and they weren't there. I never liked Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor. It just didn't work for me as Lex Luthor. Again, as a movie, this is a different review. As an adaptation of the comic, I didn't like it. It was kind of garbage. Brandon Routh looked great as Superman. It was actually a pretty cool Superman. Movie was stupid. It was like, this is ridiculous. Spacey, his acting was fine. I didn't like him as Lex Luthor. So I do like that they chose to do Zod for Man of Steel. I think that's a much cooler concept, much like Superman 2 was. However, and Superman 2 could have been more, but again, the original release was garbage. The Donner cut, much better movie. But of course, the fight scenes are slow, methodical. But again, that would probably rate as the second best Superman movie for me, excluding, of course, the animated series. And when I say the animated series, I'll include Justice League also in there, all the Superman stuff. I thought those were great adaptations. Those are very good adaptations of Superman. Family-friendly Superman, but not bad. But something that Snyder brought was understanding that Superman, yes, he is all-powerful, but he never once had to instantly depower him, have him pass out from gas, have a piece of kryptonite around so he's super weak. He didn't do that. He didn't crutch. Not one time did he have to crutch on making Superman out of it. Like, if you ever watched the Justice League cartoon, that was a lot of what they did. And even in some of the old comics and some of the old cartoons, they do that where, oh, kryptonite, Superman's weak. Okay, we can beat him up now. And that was a huge problem I noticed when especially the Stan Berkowitz written era of Justice League, Superman would always get knocked out of commission by something silly. And then because they didn't know what to do with someone so powerful. But Snyder didn't back down. He made him super powerful. And still, you were afraid for him, or I was. I felt that he didn't know what to do. He wasn't sure. He questioned himself as a hero, as a man, as the person being able to provide hope. Could he do that? And that really struck home. And especially at the end, the big thing is, Superman killed him. Well, yeah, but he had no choice. And that also made it more impactful. So is that a direct adaptation of Superman from the comics? Would he kill? Probably not in the comics. But given that story, he had a choice. Does he sacrifice his own moral values to save those people? Or does he uphold his own moral values, let those people die, and still be a hero? And rather, he had to choose to deliver that message of hope and sacrifice his own internal values for the betterment of mankind. And that's where I feel that excels so well. And I feel the power and emotion. Other casting I felt was great. Amy Adams, Lois Lane, I've heard complaints, she doesn't look like Lois Lane. I'm like, well, I don't really care if she looks like her. I mean, an important character trait of Lois Lane was never she was a brunette. It was just her acting. It's not like her hair color mattered. And I thought Amy Adams did a great job of portraying her emotionally. Now, this sets up what was to become the Snyderverse. And we were supposed to get all these other movies, and Man of Steel 2 was supposed to come. And, at that point, all I was waiting for was the next thing. Well, Dawn of Justice was talked about eventually becoming Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. And my understanding there is, too, you got to get, butts in the seats. So people seeing Dawn of Justice, maybe not so much. Batman fighting Superman, oh yes. So that's what they went with. And the studio cut definitely shows that because they cut out a lot of the plot. Now, when that movie, it's important to understand, it's in the middle. leading up to Justice League. So it's effectively part of a trilogy. Now, Justice League is supposed to be another trilogy in itself. We'll discuss that in a bit. So you've got effectively your Empire Strikes Back. So I went in understanding that movie's probably going to end on a cliffhanger and maybe sad, much like Empire. It's a depressing movie. If when you watch Empire Strikes Back, not knowing you're going to see Return of the Jedi in 3 years, Empire Strikes Back is a horribly depressing movie. They don't win. And Dawn of Justice is the same way. So I want to talk about the complaints I've heard in the movie and then explain kind of how I felt. And again, this is a rewatch, so it's kind of, I'm coming this fresh on purpose. Again, to how do I feel now? Because again, after you watch something for, you don't see something, you see something in the theater, maybe you love it, and you watch it a year or two, maybe 5 later, and you're like, what the hell was I thinking? This movie got a lot of flack, and I didn't understand why. Ben Affleck as Batman, perfect. The only one I might give a higher point to would be Kevin Conroy. I mean that because I love that's my Batman. I want to see a veteran Batman. I want to see a Batman that has been through hell, and he's now, he's still fighting. He's fighting his demons inside. He wants to do good, but he's fighting horrible guilt, horrible pain at all times, trying to still be that hero. And that's what we have here. So a lot of the complaints I saw were with regards to Luthor. Now, Jesse Eisenberg as Luthor. I actually kind of, as far as movie adaptations, I like him better than everybody else. And I think, obviously, Luthor from the animated series, tops. And of course, from Super Friends, I love that Luthor too. But that's a little bit different. So how do you adapt Luthor, who's again had so many forms in the comics? And I think a lot of people forget that he was a businessman. He was a super smart guy. He was President Luthor. He was Muhaha Power Armor Luthor. I mean, there's so many Luthors. How do you adapt that? And so for me, they said, okay, let's take, he's a super genius, but also evil, because that was the point. Luthor was evil, categorically evil. He literally became president just to do bad stuff. I mean, he went through all that effort just so this is a maniacal planner. He's willing to play the long game just to do something horrible. And we got that in Dawn of Justice. All that over-the-top planning to frame Superman, not to get him guilty, but to make Superman doubt himself and to put him in that position and to bring down, the hero of all the people who now we were faced with a world where in reality, I believe people would worship him. I mean, in the comics, especially when you read the Death of Superman era, that was something that they had to, how do you establish a world where you can do the Death of Superman without a 24 episode series, right? So they had to really build him up and show that even with his godlike powers, he was still extremely vulnerable. And Luthor's plan did that. And he wanted to also, crush Batman because he doesn't want these people around so he can control everything. And he also enjoys the pleasure of manipulating himself. So I felt that was great. The way he did the letters with the red writing that matched how the Joker had tortured Batman when he killed Jason Todd. And we know that's in the universe. Now, again, that's one aspect I can maybe ding a half point off that movie for. If you didn't know the history of Jason Todd, when they show that suit, you're not going to get the connection there. And for me, that was Luthor manipulating Batman based on knowing what had happened to him. And that's why when they meet, it's like, why didn't they just talk? Well, Superman tried to talk, but he was in such a psychotic rage, and I feel that rage was earned. It was earned by the character through the course of Dawn of Justice, that he wouldn't have been rational until he heard the name Martha. Now, this was things, I remember I heard this when the movie came out, and even when I watched it in the theater, I was like, and? What's the big deal? But everybody seems to harp on this. But, and I wonder, this is the last word that a child heard from his dying father. Now, if you've never had anyone die close to you, maybe you don't understand the importance of their last words and what that can mean, especially to a child, where you come back and just that memory is going to immediately snap you out of it. And Superman had been trying to explain to him. And the moment they're face to face and he can hear him, because there's no storming rain, no explosions, he hears that and for a second he's like, wait, what? Wait, what? And he thinks, and that snapped him out of that berserker rage. I have no problem with that. It made perfect sense to me in the context of the movie. Now, I don't remember the theater cut. Maybe that wasn't in the theater cut where that first part. I honestly don't remember. I'll never watch it again. But again, no problem with that scene. I never understood the complaint. That Batman, gadgets, super amazing. Technology, super cool. So that, to me, the best Batman. Yes, I do love Nolan's Batman trilogy, but to me, that's not really a superhero Batman. That's a real world Batman. So it's a drama. It's an effective an action drama and a great trilogy, but it's a very different style of Batman. So I would say overall, I definitely prefer Affleck's Batman as Bruce Wayne and as Batman. You had to introduce Doomsday, right? How do you introduce Doomsday again without doing an entire season of a TV show? Thought they did a pretty good job. I'm excusing the fact that these movies aren't 10 hours long, as I would prefer them to be, but they still give the emotion. And I even remember the first time. I knew once we saw Doomsday, Superman had to die. But I still wasn't ready for it. And it still struck me the way they showed it. And I loved the foreshadowing of Excalibur. You know, it's like, because those of you who don't know, they at the beginning of the movie when Bruce's parents die, you see the Zorro poster, but if you see next week playing is Excalibur. And Superman Doomsday, the way he kills himself and pulls himself onto the arm spike is a dead-on copy of the ending of Excalibur. And I thought that was just beautiful and so emotional. Like, I felt, oh my God, Superman is dead. And I felt it. I felt the weight. And that's something that really Snyder was able to do. I feel the weight of every action, every decision, of every character in this series of films. That it matters what they do. It matters when something bad happens. And that's something I feel is missing from almost all other, quote, superhero movies. And quick divergence there, I think it shouldn't be superhero movies. It should be, this is a drama, happens to have a character in spandex in it. Or this is a horror, it happens to have a character in spandex. I think we should look at them like that. Whereas, to me, these are dramas. These are dramatic films that happen to have characters from comic books in them. I thought Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, great. Especially Diana Prince, thought she was fantastic, her introduction. Score, of course, was always fantastic in Snyder movies, I mean, given the composer. And Dawn of Justice sets us up for something truly cool, you know? And then at that point, we're waiting. So Justice League, I mean, the huge plague, I mean, with problems. The new studio exec obviously didn't like Snyder or his vision and wanted to make the stockholders happy. So there was a lot of infighting. But then when Snyder's daughter, unfortunately, passed away, you know, he walked. And at that point, my understanding was most principal photography is done, but not completed. Studio brought in some hack to make a piece of garbage, which is exactly what happened, because the movie's an abomination. I would never recommend watching that unless you want to do a film analysis of why directors are important. Watch Exhibit A, Exhibit B, and you can see even the scenes that are identical in the garbage version are like, oh, that's stupid, pointless, and silly. And then you see the exact same scene in Snyder's vision, and you're like, wow, that actually is pretty good. So, finally, when I got to see the real Justice League, 15 minutes in, I was already euphoric, understanding this is what I had been waiting for. This is the movie I wanted. Now, that movie is no small feat. There is so much in there that It is, I recommend watching it twice just to try to absorb it all. But you have the Justice League, right? How do you introduce these characters? We already established Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. We got the cheetah little Wonder Woman because she had her own solo movie too, so that helped at that point. And I think that was a good idea. So you still got to introduce other characters. They managed to give arcs to all of the characters in that film. Barry Allen, who, again, I wasn't a fan of Ezra Miller. I don't know who he is. He's amazing in Justice League. Amazing. As the Flash, works perfect. His comedy, more like Wally. So I would say, again, Ezra Miller is Wally West, but he works well as Wally West. Now, when he appeared, and that whole moment when he first, meets Iris and saves her, I was like, that's the Flash. That's the first thing that came to mind was that is the Flash. I want to see that Flash in film. And I actually quite like the CW series, the first few seasons. That was amazing. But you even have an arc. You have an arc for all these characters. He starts out as completely naive, aimless in life, joking because he's nervous, he's out of his depth, to by the end understanding he's got to, he's willing to do whatever it takes, sacrifice himself if need be, to save the world because of all these people. His jokes get less and less and less. And by the end, he even understands he's got to work to save his father. So he actually gets his job. You have an arc for these characters. Cyborg. Cyborg heavily changed from the comics. Well, not the New 52, but heavily changed from the original comics. I'm okay with that. I actually like the change they did, and making him part of the Mother Box helped facilitate the speed of the story. Much like how Snyder changed Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen, because it facilitates a quicker telling of the story. It makes things go together a little easier. So I like that. But his story too of blaming his father and going through that whole cycle to understanding what his father did, why his father did it, to forgiving his father, an arc. The movie is 4 hours, but we have arcs for those. Batman who blamed himself for his own foolishness of Dawn of Justice, came full circle to understand that he has to forgive himself in order to bring these people together to stop everything. Arthur Curry, he wanted to isolate himself, right? Come full circle. He understands he can't. He's got to seek out, his own retribution because he can't isolate himself from the world forever. You have all these arcs just in that one movie. It's absolutely fantastic. A lot of times I felt the modern superhero movies, they don't have any arcs. The characters, they're the same at the beginning and the same at the end. Nothing matters. Nothing changes. It's the exact same, and nobody's gone. Everybody comes back, and you never feel the weight. And this, you still feel the weight. And throughout Justice League, it's when Steppenwolf is there. They don't gimp him. He's terrifying. He's mowing through gods, Amazons, the Atlanteans, Green Lantern. He just wipes. That was dark. That was Darkseid at that point. But still, you feel the threat of these characters when you see Steppenwolf, and he's annihilating these people, and you understand that Steppenwolf is just a lackey of Darkseid. You're like, ooh. Okay, Darkseid's got to be a nasty dude. And that matters. I'm threatened by the villain. I need to be threatened. I need to feel like this guy can actually do damage. Not, they're going to sure save him. I never felt that. Because it's like, okay, this is just the lackey. And they're having a hard time even standing against this guy. How are they going to win? Now, also, we don't have Superman. And I thought that was important. We really see how difficult it is without Superman, and we don't see Superman until the last 40 something minutes of the movie, which I thought was perfect, because you don't need to. You need to have that time without Superman to understand why Superman needs to be there. Because if you just bring him right back, well, then there's no weight to the movie. Because honestly, going in, Is he going to come back to life? I mean, from the comics, you assume he is, right? But is he? And what's he going to do? And then he comes back, and he was bad, terrifying, and threatening. Well, you already had those visions from Bruce Wayne's dreams where, maybe we're going to get an evil Superman thing here. Now, that's foreshadowing. I'll talk about that in a minute. For the projects that never occurred. But, it was the fight between the Justice League and Superman was threatening. Superman was never weakened. He just brushed them off like flies. So you understand how powerful this guy is. And that to me was so well done. There was no humor, no goofy jokes, just, oh my God, this is threatening. And, him being coming back was an absolutely brilliant scene. Now, you had the whole Justice League, Batman included, saying, we have to do this anyway. And I felt vested in that. Like, okay, they're going to still try to save the world. They don't care. They all know they're going to die, but it's better than not trying. And they do that. And the failure, when they fail to save him, and Barry has to go back in time to get to that moment where he can charge the mother box and save, so Cyborg can link in with it. Perfect. It was so triumphant and powerful. And then you had Cyborg overcoming his own guilt to do it. Like all these things at once, like bam, ooh. And Superman appearing, just the way he appeared. And just like, I am Superman. And just trouncing Steppenwolf was great. And so they defeat him. But then how Darkseid didn't care. Like he just steps on his head. Whatever. I don't care. Brilliant. Because now you're like, oh, man, he's not fazed by this. So, what? I mean, if you don't know there's a whole slew of guys like Steppenwolf over there, then it's even more intimidating. So I thought the introduction of Ryan Choi was cool because you got little hints to know what's going to come in the future, and of course, Martian Manhunter, very cool. And I liked how they inserted him into mattering through all three films by the form he took, and to mattering in that film by helping influence Lois to go to Superman to help him remember who he is. And the last scene, the triumphant scene of all standing together, beautiful, beautiful. And then we get Nightmare, which my understanding of the original plan, Nightmare was supposed to be Justice League 2. That would have been the second movie. And that would have been a great second chapter. It would have been dark, but super interesting. That was fantastic. I mean, I love the choice of the characters in Nightmare. And Jared Leto as Joker in that was great. Like, I would love to see Jared Leto as Joker in Snyder. Would love it because he worked well. And just again, we had Deathstroke, Mira. I don't care about outside movie stuff in the film. I quite like Mira. And Mira is one of my favorite characters. Those of you who don't know, Aquaman is my favorite, always has been my favorite character. But that would have been an amazing second movie. With the third movie was the Justice League would end up on Apokolips fighting Darkseid to the end. And that would be, I can't, you had such stakes and power. I felt this is a truly massive film that I can only, in my dreams, imagine what Justice League 3 would have been had we been able to finish that. And I think, so I guess the point of this is I just want to express my love of this series of films. And perhaps maybe you can watch them again and watch them as a whole and really feel the emotion of them and understand there is no such thing as a superhero movie. There's a movie. And a movie has to be good. It doesn't matter if you got a guy in spandex, or you got a furry raccoon, or you got a normal average Joe. It's got to be a good movie. And these are good movies with real dramatic moments and stakes that matter. And I just love rewatching. I'm so invigorated. My love of cinema is actually stimulated. And I only have a little bit of sadness because I know we'll never get to see more. That part does sadden me. And now, as at the moment of uploading this, pretty much everyone has already signaled the death's door of the quote superhero film. So maybe we'll go back to when we got films like Blade. Nobody said that was a comic book movie or a superhero movie. Good movie. It was a good movie. It just happened to be based on a comic book character, and maybe we'll go back to that, and that would be a good thing. But my advice is rewatch all three of these films together and give them a nice clean slate chance of being a film. And especially if you're a fan of really a fan of DC Comics, not of, I'm a fan of Donner's Superman film. That's not really the same thing as being a fan of the comics, in my opinion. And not a bad thing. I mean, of course you can be that, but give them another chance if you haven't watched them in a while, and watch them all together to really get the weight of what was there. And also use your imagination to think, what would the Green Lantern Corps series have been after this? What would the Flash movie have been after this? What would the other movies that would have existed been after this? Before Justice League 2, before Justice League 3? And what would have been the conclusion after Justice League 3? I would think Flashpoint would have been amazing. A Snyder Flashpoint after Justice League 3 that completely resets the universe, ends Snyder's universe, and resets all the actors. Would have been amazing. So that's all I wanted to say. And hey, keep watching movies, and I hope you like Movie Mayhem.